She's got some nice long hair and
Welcome to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron, and we are live on Twitch, on YouTube. Just search for Unbearable Sports Podcast. And yeah, this is the second time going live. We used to a lot more, but now trying to get back into the swing of things. Seems like a lot of people liked it. So just doing it for the mock draft Mondays. But we are back. This is we have two more today and next week, and we're already gonna be at the NFL draft. It's 10 days away. Absolutely crazy, but welcome on back, and make sure to like, make sure to subscribe. We are in the thick of it all. We have 3 days straight of draft coverage, so you want to make sure to follow us anywhere that you can, and even also on all sorts of different podcasting platforms as well. But like I said, 3 days straight of draft content, and we have more coming up, so you don't want to miss it. Also, this mock draft Monday, I'm actually using my mic. I am actually connected. I want to thank Funkbringer. He's helped me out with some of this audio stuff. He's called me out with it, very friendly with it, and helped me out with it. So props. Thank you again for letting me know about my audio. So thank you so much. And I hope it's sounding good. But let's get into this. So last week we had this fun idea. I had this idea that we're just going to have the computer basically generate some mock drafts for us, and we're going to then assess it. And honestly, I thought it was really fun. We saw some different new types of pieces, new things kind of pop up from this draft. So what I wanted to kind of go through is we used the draft network last time. And so this time, what we're going to do is we're going to use PFF. PFF seems to be the favorite for a lot of different people. So we're going to leverage PFF, and I actually had to jerry rig it a little bit, and I'll kind of tell it a little bit more. So basically, I have it auto pick 5 mock drafts for us. And this is a good exercise because, first off, it shows what goes on with all the other types of draft picks that are happening because we always care about the Bears, but we don't know how valuable, how trustworthy are these actual mock drafts. So we get to see what are they actually picking for the Bears, and it gives us a couple of different interesting scenarios, to say the least. So this is definitely a lot more different than the draft networks, and you'll see why as we go through it. I actually had to go through it because I'll show you in a little bit. So basically, what ended up happening is with the draft scenarios, with the NFL draft, with PFF, basically what PFF does is it forces you to actually make the picks. So I couldn't do what I was doing before and basically just simulating through it. So for those that can actually see my screen, and also just so the people that are listening to the podcast, basically what I did is I became the Miami Dolphins. What I did was I just traded away all their picks for just basically nothing. The reason is because then we can simulate to the end of the draft, and then all the Bears picks are then automatically picked for us, and then we can assess it. So I did actually take a peek at all these. I'm trying not to look at them so I don't remind myself what the Bears ended up picking, but I got to say, some of these are a little bit wacky, a little bit wacky to say the least. So I'm excited to get right into this. So let's get this thing started. So with our first mock draft, I'm just going to start scrolling down to the 39th pick so we can start to see kind of who's getting picked. And honestly, nothing too crazy that jumps off. One thing that's a big difference between the Draft Network and PFF, the Draft Network has Bernard Raymond from Central Michigan, dropping a little bit more towards the Bears. And we've talked about this before, that he is somebody that is dropping more towards the Bears range. So I'm starting to love it. I really like that he could potentially be a Chicago Bear, realistically, which is a good, good issue that we could potentially have. But obviously, we're getting down to the 39th. I'm not going to show it yet. But what I like here is the quarterbacks being selected. I like seeing Desmond Ridder. I like seeing Sam Howell, because the more quarterbacks that get picked, the more talented players drop to the Bears. So that's definitely a good sign. Skye Moore, we just talked about this on the last episode. Skye Moore played on the outside for Western Michigan, but still kind of projects to be more of that slot. But in the PFF mocks, he's definitely going a lot higher, definitely going more towards that end of the first round range. So, also another safety, Jaquan Brisker, another guy to kind of be on the lookout for that the Chicago Bears have been talking about. And I just want to call attention to one other piece as well. Just Treylon Burks, wide receiver out of Arkansas. Just want to mention as well that the Bears have actually, the rumor is that the Chicago Bears are talking with Treylon Burks and might have him in for a workout. We will see. But basically, there's connections with the Bears and Treylon Burks. Does that mean they're trading up? Or does it mean that they're just doing their due diligence if he ends up falling? Just an exciting little headline. So some might have seen because I scrolled a little bit too fast. But with the 39th pick, the PFF draft board ends up taking Arnold Abacadi, the edge out of Penn State. Now, like I said, this is a little bit wonky. I've never seen Abacadi ever go to the Chicago Bears in many different mock drafts. He's the edge out of Penn State, but what can I tell you about Abacadi? So he's 6'2", 250 pounds. But really, the way that I like to think about him is he's very fluid. He's got great bend. He's got incredible hands. But also, too, you can look at his stats out here 8 sacks last year. So, really, a very good pass rusher, 32 hurries. But another piece, too, is he actually transferred from Temple. And what I love is he wanted to bet on himself and say, you know what? I'm going to dominate and I'm going to show you guys that I am a good pass rusher. Goes over to Penn State, starts dominating, and does very well. But if he's this fluid bent, he can also even defend the run. But why did he drop to the second round? And the big reason is that he's got not necessarily like incredible physical traits. When you're talking about a 250-pound edge rusher, you might want a little bit more girth on him, a little bit more length as well. So a lot of the knocks are just he's not an incredible physical player, but still a very interesting pick because let's just talk about this edge position. I don't really feel like we necessarily need an edge. If we are drafting an edge, then I kind of go more towards is Robert Quinn going to be here or are we going to trade him? Are we going to get something for him? What's exactly going to happen with that? So, yet again, this is a computer picking. So, I think that it was more of like best player available. Bears kind of select Abacadi. And I just realized my camera is over the selections. So, for those that are watching on YouTube, a little bit more difficult. I'm going to shift this over a little bit for you guys right there. So Abacadi, though, the first pick for the Bears. Do I love it? Not so much. PFF, your first pick is not. I don't love it. I think it's interesting. It's different. That's the reason why we do these computer-generated mock drafts are for the weird picks. But let's keep on going down. We're going to be shifting down to the 48th pick. And as we do that, I want to kind of bring up who was also kind of on the board when we ended up taking Abacadi. Now, some of them are Jahan Dotson, wide receiver out of Penn State. I didn't talk about him last episode too much because there's way too many wide receivers. But honestly, I think that he's an incredible slot player. Would love him on the Bears. So honestly, I like all these other picks that are after us. Travis Jones, defensive interior out of UConn. Jalen Petrie, love him. Slot corner, could potentially be a safety. Roger Mccreery out of Auburn, great cornerback. And George Pickens going one pick before the Chicago Bears. So we got an edge. Now I'm kind of leaning we need a wide receiver, we need an offensive lineman. Let's see what PFF decided to take. PFF said with the 48th pick, the Chicago Bears select wide receiver Christian Watson out of North Dakota State. So Christian Watson, we've talked about him before. Physical freak, absolutely incredible. 6'4", 208, blazing speed. Just really the combine was where people saw just how much next level of an athlete this guy is. Absolutely incredible. But you can see here too, just from the PFF stats, that 16 drops on 120 catchable passes. When you have stuff like that, it becomes becomes difficult. He's definitely a project. So you kind of have this project wide receiver. He could come in, light the world on fire, or he could kind of take a couple of years to kind of get into the swing of things. But overall, I don't mind the pick because we got a wide receiver. We got somebody good for Justin Fields. But when I'm looking at a couple people afterwards, Logan Hall, I've seen some people, more and more people actually mocking him to the Chicago Bears. Logan Hall, defensive interior out of Houston. Tyler Smith, a very popular pick. Actually, my thumbnail for this live event. The powerful left tackle. Some think that he's a guard out of Tulsa. A lot of basically any inside linebacker not named Devin Lloyd. Or N'Kobe Dean went later on as well. But then let's just keep on going down into our third pick at pick 71. Now, before this, what we're starting to see is we're starting to see some of the tackles that Abraham Lucas, Darian Kennard, Jamari Salyer, these were all players about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, they were always kind of falling into the Chicago Bears' hands. Maybe not Kennard, but what we're seeing is some of these guys are kind of creeping up, which is kind of bad for the Chicago Bears. So we already have an edge. I don't know why the PFF drafted an edge, but they did. And Christian Watson. So we have a wide receiver. And with the 71st pick, the Chicago Bears select Alec Pierce, wide receiver out of Cincinnati. PFF, you're doubling up on wide receivers. Not sure why. Maybe if I'm trying to put a positive spin on PFF taking two wide receivers, I'm going off of, well, maybe they don't think Christian Watson can kind of develop. And then you have Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce is really kind of the way I see him, straight line, very tall. I think he's about 6'3". I can just pull up some of his stats. 6'3", 211, just a very fast, very good at kind of the straight line. He was always just doing some digs and also just going deep. So really not a big route runner. The big nervousness that I have with him as well is when I'm looking at him, you always had Christian Watson. I mean, not Christian Watson. You always had Desmond Ridder, one of the top quarterback prospects, and he never eclipsed. Alec Pierce never eclipsed over 1,000 yards. It's not saying that. It's just more like, well, why is that? That's one of my big question marks with Alec Pierce. And he does kind of seem like a one-trick pony. But what's good is if you're a one-trick pony, we can scheme you into this offense as a one-trick pony. I just don't love it because you have Christian Watson that could be more of a deep ball, Alec Pierce more of a deep ball. So you know what, PFF right now not loving it, but at least we're getting some weapons for Justin Fields. So two wide receivers and one edge so far from PFF. Now let's shift all the way down to pick 148, and we'll see who the Bears end up selecting or who PFF selects for the Chicago Bears. So already see a couple good names that I like. Verone McKinley, Marquis Bell, but with pick 148, the Chicago Bears select Justin Shafer, the guard out of Georgia. So Justin Shafer, a little bit about him. We haven't talked about him on the podcast at all. I'll pull up his stats. And so he's 6'4", 314. Now, the thing to know about him is he's really more of a left guard. He played a little bit at right guard, but I don't know if it was because of injury. I didn't watch the tape at that, but a lot of draft scouts around the league are really saying that he's just a left guard, which makes me a little bit concerned. But he's similar to Salyer, where he's a big upper body guy with not a lot of great feet. So to me, with Schaefer, I get a little bit nervous because even though that he graded very well at zone blocking, according to PFF, to me, he's still more of a natural gap scheme type of player, which means that you're in front of your guy. You need to dominate the guy in front of you. He's got that power, but not a lot of the agility that you want to see in a zone type of blocker. He got beat a lot. You saw 15 hurries last year, which is not great from a guard perspective. So I'm not in love with this. You're talking about a left guard, or probably a left guard only, unless Whitehair kind of moves over to the other side. And also just kind of the lack of athleticism. I don't love him, and I know that I'm kind of ripping him apart, but I'm just not the biggest fan. He's more of a run blocker. You can see it in the PFF grades, 76.8 last year, 55 pass grade last year. So really kind of that actually explains exactly how he kind of played. Very heavy run, not necessarily too much in the pass. And yet again, might project more as that gap grade. So not a big fan of the selection. Now let's see. So at 149, the Carolina Panthers took Chris Paul, the tackle slash guard out of Tulsa. See, to me, I like Chris Paul a little bit more. Matter of preference. But I would have rather seen that rather than Schaefer. Just not a big fan of him. So moving on, pick 150. The Chicago Bears select Demarco Jackson, linebacker out of Appalachian State. Now, I like this pick. Anytime that you're picking a linebacker late in the draft, I always like that. So 6'1, 233. He was a senior, played a lot for the Appalachian State Mountaineers. And what I like about him, too, is he has the potential to be an all around linebacker, and you're getting him super late in the draft. He also played a lot of special teams. So to me, I love the idea if the Bears draft a linebacker late because you're able to have them at least kind of compete against some other people and try and win a starting job. But if not, they can at least be a special teamer. So I like the idea. And also, we need a lot more linebackers. We filled out a lot of the roster at least. But that's why I like the idea of at least getting somebody later on. He's a linebacker that I think has some decent upside. Demarco Jackson, very good at attacking the run, kind of plays that attacking scheme where as soon as he starts seeing it, diagnoses the play pretty quick and just starts attacking downhill, but also has some flexibility as a pass coverage guy as well. So he's not just one dimensional. Like I said, good upside with this pick. So BFF, you kind of redeemed yourself a little bit with that auto pick as well. And let's fast forward down to pick 186, the last pick of the first mock draft generated by PFF. And the final pick of the draft is at pick 186, the Chicago Bears select Hassan Haskins, running back out of Michigan. Now, I always go back and forth with these running back picks because come on, we have a lot of good. We have Darrington Evans. Like we have some good running backs here, obviously. So whenever I see a running back getting selected, I always kind of pull this out here, and I know a lot of Bears fans don't like this, but if you are drafting a running back, I always kind of scratch my head and go, is this because you want to just see if you can add another backup and potentially not pay David Montgomery? Because otherwise, if you're just adding a fourth running back, I don't know how much you're going to be using that. So are you testing it out? What are you trying to do there? So Hassan Haskins, he's got a lot of upside as a ball carrier. He doesn't fumble the football. He's got really great size. He had only really kind of 1 year of production at Michigan, though, like really good season, which was last year, 1,327 yards, 20 touchdowns. So very, very good. Also, he's got very good contact balance, not Khalil Herbert or David Montgomery level contact balance, but still a very good upright runner. If the Bears got him, it would be very hard to bring him down. So I like the pick. I just always kind of scratch my head though when you see a running back get selected, just because I don't know if the Bears really need one if you're going to be drafting one. So that wraps up the first mock draft that PFF has generated. So I'm going to try and rate this. Overall, the what the Bears ended up getting is Arnold Abacadi, the edge out of Penn State at pick 39. Pick 48 was Christian Watson, the wide receiver out of North Dakota State. Then at pick 71, Alec Pierce, the wide receiver from Cincinnati. Then at pick 148 was Justin Schaefer, the guard out of Georgia. 150, Demarco Jackson out of Appalachian State. And at 186 was Hassan Haskins, the running back out of Michigan. Now, when I look at this, this is the whole two wide receiver thing with the edge And also with Schaefer, I'm not loving that. I'm not loving the first 4 picks. I got to think about it as me as a Bears fan. If I saw the Bears have that draft class, I'm kind of scratching my head being kind of disappointed. So to me, I'm giving this maybe a C minus. I might be a little optimistic because it's the first one, but I don't love the first mock draft that the Bears have. So let me know down in the comments what you think. Like we said, Abacadi, Christian Watson, Alec Pierce, Justin Shafer, Demarco Jackson, and Hassan Haskins with the first PFF mock draft. Not loving it, but I might just be a little bit picky because it's the first one. So let's get on with the second mock draft. Let me shift this back over and we can start analyzing it. Like we said before, we traded away how we generate these. I trade away every single Miami Dolphins pick. And then we basically just go through. That's why I can't show my draft grades because my draft grades are C's because the Dolphins just traded everybody away. So when we go to the full results, let me scroll down and we can start getting to pick 39. And we're seeing kind of the same people go off the board like we did before, because it's the same exact engine that we leveraged before. But what I like seeing is I like seeing Matt Corral and Sam Howell going right before the Bears pick. There we go. Come on, quarterbacks, get juiced, get higher. And Kenny Pickett going as well. Want to see that. Jahan Dotson and Skye Moore also going before the Chicago Bears pick. Not loving that because you're starting to see some of the wide receivers being going a little bit. Lewis Stein also going before the Chicago Bears pick. But at pick 39, the Chicago Bears select Roger Mccreery, cornerback out of Auburn. So I like this pick. The big question, though, with cornerback is we just got one. We just got Tavon Young. I think that's the big question mark. Is he going? Do we feel like that's enough? Does Ryan Poles feel that's enough? Does Matt Eberflus think that's enough? I think that's the big question here is, do we feel like we are fine at cornerback or maybe we need a slot? I think that's a big question that's going to kind of shape the draft for the Chicago Bears. But a little bit about Mccreery. He's a multi-year starter, just a very, very safe floor, I guess you would say. Very productive at Auburn, 5'11, 190, coming out as a senior. Didn't necessarily have too many interceptions, but really played the ball very well. He was first in the league, according to PFF, with 20 forced incompletions, and also just has some decent size, like we said, decent height. But why is this guy that he's also very good at mirroring other defenders, very good cover guy? So why is he dropping to the second? And the big reason is I've never really seen somebody like when you watch the tape, the first thing that jumped out besides his coverage skills is I go, he's got really short arms. Like I normally don't call that out, but you see it and you're like, that dude's got some really tiny arms to the point that I'm like, I don't know how he swats the ball, but he does, obviously, with 24 stick completion. But the dude's got tiny arms. And that's why you see him dropping. In all seriousness, he's got small arms. He also isn't necessarily, he doesn't have a lot of high-end athletic traits. So that's why you're seeing him drop. But like we said, he should have a pretty decent floor and should be a pretty good cornerback. So I like this pick. Like I said, it's just a little bit confusing because how much do the Bears actually like Tavon Young after they added him in? But let's see who the Bears could have had with the next couple picks. So we're seeing Kyler Gordon, the cornerback out of Washington, Travis Jones, the defensive interior out of Connecticut going as well. Logan Hall, defensive interior out of Houston. He's kind of like a tweener, just a very bulky guy, so could be a very good pass rusher. Jaquan Brisker, the safety out of Penn State. And also, yet again, second mock draft in a row, that George Pickens, the wide receiver out of Georgia, goes one pick before the Chicago Bears. But at pick 48, the Chicago Bears select Tyler Smith, tackle out of Tulsa. Now I'm liking this mock draft so far. We got a cornerback, obviously the Tavon Young stuff, but we at least have somebody that we feel comfortable that can go in and fill in. So I like that selection. And Tyler Smith, to me, what I like about this is I like the Bears drafting a left tackle. So I like that the computer selected Tyler Smith at least. So you have this left tackle. Some people project him as a guard. I don't really get that. I think that you have this guy who's 6'5". He's a big guy and he's got all the physical traits that you want. So the big thing though is definitely watch his film. He's an incredible run blocker. Can just dominate and just throw someone down into the dirt. Biggest question mark though is he's very undisciplined. So he likes to get his hands on the guy and take a lot of holding calls. We thought that Charles Leno had a lot of holding calls. Tyler Smith's got more. So that's why a lot of people really like Tyler Smith because they're saying, well, I could coach that. I could make this guy better because he's only 21 years old. He's a very, very young prospect with a very, very high ceiling. So I still hear a couple experts saying that they project Tyler Smith to potentially go into that first round range. But I love it if he's able to drop to us. Like I said, left tackle that has very high potential. If we can tap that from him, he shows all the good traits that you want to see out of a tackle. But let's keep on going. So right now we got a cornerback, we got a tackle. Let's see what the pick is from the computers at pick 70. So right before that, we're seeing Abraham Lucas go again, Jamari Salyer. We're seeing Trey McBride, the tight end, go in the second round, which we're starting to see a little bit more. Brian Asamoah, a very good linebacker, go a pick right before us. But at pick 71, the Chicago Bears select Daniel Falele, the tackle out of Minnesota. So this is really the first time I've really seen Daniel Falele go to the Chicago Bears. And if you want to know anything about him, he's enormous. He is 6'8", 384 pounds, just an absolute giant. He's even though that he's huge, you still kind of want him at that right tackle spot. And that's why a lot of people are seeing him kind of drop because a lot of people are saying, like, listen, he's huge. We've seen huge prospects not do anything. So he's really kind of a project. So with this, we're getting a left tackle, we're getting a right tackle inside of this draft. But honestly, he's enormous. He's a very big project player. I don't love this selection that the computer made because he's more of a gap player rather than zone. Yet again, kind of slowish in the feet, but he can win his one-on-one in that running game. So I don't love him in a zone system that we're assuming that we're probably going to be running. So I don't love the pit because of the scheme fit. But still, we're at least getting some offensive linemen with a left tackle and a right tackle. Maybe Smith could be potentially a guard. But I think that's what's a little bit weird is that Daniel Falele is really going to be a right tackle. So if you move Tyler Smith as a guard, or you try and have Jenkins as a guard, or Borum as a guard, it's a really interesting scenario. Like I said, the PFF ones, I think they don't really understand after they've drafted somebody that maybe we should stop drafting at that position. So let's keep on going. Let's go all the way down to pick 148. So we're going all the way down. I'm not going to necessarily talk too much about the people that go beforehand, just because they can kind of be all over the board. But with pick 148, the Chicago Bears have selected a Caleb Evans, the cornerback out of Missouri. Now, guy that we really haven't talked about too much. But what I will tell you about a Caleb Evans is that he actually has a lot of potential to be a Chicago Bear cornerback. What I mean by that is we know that Eberflus loves long, lanky corners. There's really no one else that's almost as long as lanky as him. There's a couple others, but a Caleb Evans is 6'2", 197 pounds. He's got a lot of that length that we know that Eberflus wants inside of this defense. And also, he kind of took a chance on himself, which I really respect this year. So he went from Tulsa and transferred over to Missouri just to kind of show what he can do in a bigger school, I guess you could say. Slightly bigger, I would say, from a level of competition, but really did well. He also showed that he's also a very, very sticky cornerback with his long length. He can really get in front of you, really be very productive inside of a press coverage scheme. So I really like him out here. I like this selection, but what I don't like about it, we already drafted a cornerback. So come on, PFF. We're drafting another outside corner, and the reason why I don't love it as well is the Bears still like if the Bears were to go this route and they go Roger Mccreery and then they go a Caleb Evans as this simulated mock draft is saying, I think that what that shows is that Kindle Vildor would see the door as soon as that happens. Like, peace out. We don't need you. And fans will rejoice. So I guess that's one of the big benefits of that selection is saying deuces to Kindle Vildor. And I realized I just scrolled down and showed people on the video what the Bears select next. So we'll go straight into this. And at pick 150, the Chicago Bears select Marquis Bell, the safety out of Florida A&M, someone that I really like because of his versatility. Very big size, great upside. There's a couple different questions on his character, but really, if you're getting him, he's somebody that can be a good player for you at that safety position. But I'm sitting here going, all right, PFF, we added a corner, we added another corner, we added a safety, we added 2 tackles. We need some wide receivers, guys. We need some wide receivers out here. So maybe we get one with the last pick. I mean, you're not going to guarantee that this person's going to be a starter. But let's scroll all the way down to pick 186, and we will see who the Chicago Bears select. Like we said, we have 2 corners, 1 safety, and 2 tackles. And with pick 186, the Chicago Bears select Jalen Armour Davis, another cornerback from Alabama. So, like I said, this is a very I'm doing this exercise because we're seeing how the mock drafts go. And so on the side or my main job, I'm actually a computer programmer and I actually find this very interesting. I think that PFF according to with like TDN, I think PFF really is like if somebody's available and you have the need, just load up on it. So this draft class, we got 3 corners, we got a safety, and we got 2 tackles. Justin Fields is going to be pissed. We'll just put it that way with this. But basically, a little bit about Jalen Armour Davis. This is someone that I'm not a huge fan of, but others really are. He's 6'1", so he's got solid length. So maybe Eberflus really likes him. But what I've noticed is that both PFF, both myself, both the Draft Network, we're all not big fans of his tape. Yes, he's an Alabama corner, but a lot of people are actually projecting him to go in the 4th round, which is way too high, in my opinion, for someone with his skill set. I just didn't really see it on tape. You might see that he's got 3 interceptions, but I watched every interception of his. It was 2 of them right to him, and 1 of them was tipped right to him. So he wasn't really making a play on the ball too much. So that's why I'm not the biggest fan of him. I watched a little bit of the USFL. He reminded me of watching some of the corners at the USFL game. So I'm not a big fan of him, but obviously that's why they play the game. That's why they're out there. He's got good size. He's got some solid athleticism. And as you can see from the PFF grades, his final year, he scored very well. He graded very well. 81.5 coverage grade is nothing to kind of, scoff at. But when I did watch him, just wasn't a big fan. So this mock draft number 2, the Chicago Bears selected Roger Mccreery, the cornerback out of Auburn, then followed by Tyler Smith, the tackle out of Tulsa. And then at pick 71, Daniel Falele, the tackle out of Minnesota. 148 was a Caleb Evans, the cornerback out of Missouri. 150, Marquis Bell, the safety out of Florida A&M. And at 186, Jalen Armour Davis, the cornerback out of Alabama. This is just our 2nd mock draft. And overall, I'm not very impressed so far when I'm looking at the PFF. Like, who are they selecting? I just don't. There's really no rhyme or reason. It's just we have a need and we're just going to add everybody that we can. Now, there's some strategy to that because not every pick that you have is successful, but this is a little bit ridiculous. I would give this maybe I'm not a big fan of it because you just loaded way too much up at cornerback and we don't know how many like what we feel about Tavon Young. And I've said this a million times already on this show. So to me, I really don't like it. I'm giving it another C-. But let's go to the next one and just pray for the best. um, for this one for sure. So let's get right into this one. So this is mock draft number 3 that we have generated from PFF. Like yet again for new people joining on to the live stream, what I'm saying here is that we just traded away all of the Dolphins picks, and that's how we got it. I forced it to kind of do an auto pick, so it's a little hokey, but it works. So what we have here, Sam Howell, the quarterback out of North Carolina, going at pick 32. Kenny Pickett going at 37. Jaquan Brisker, safety out of Penn State, going at 34. Skye Moore, 35. So with pick 39, the Chicago Bears select Jalen Petrie, the cornerback out of Baylor. One of my favorite draft prospects out here. To me, he is, even though that he's a cornerback, the reason why I like Jalen Petrie so much is that he potentially has this flexibility. He played cornerback, he played slot corner for the Baylor Bears. And honestly, he's got good size, 5'11, 198. You really like that, especially at a slot corner. Like normally they're super tiny. This guy's got some size to him. He can really track wide receivers very well. And sometimes with the NFL draft, you just have to go basic. Just go with someone that makes the game seem simple. We saw that with Jalen Petrie when he was at the Senior Bowl. People were saying he can just track anybody that he wants to, makes it look very easy, makes it look very simple. And to me, don't overthink it. He's a good player. You want good players on your team, and that's why I really like him. And he's phenomenal in the run game. Got a 92.7 grade from PFF, and you see that on tape. Is able to shed blockers, wide receivers off of him, and is able to make plays in the backfield. The biggest question, though, is a lot of people project him out as a safety. He only had 14 snaps at deep safety, 122 at that box position. So that's why a lot of people are kind of questioning, is he actually going to be a true safety? But overall, I like the selection because we don't necessarily have that slot corner, but at least Jalen Petrie can lock down that slot corner and have the flexibility to potentially be a safety. Now, if we're looking at who else was on the board before that, our pick at 48, we see Jahan Dotson, wide receiver, Penn State going, Travis Jones again, Logan Hall again, Roger McCreery, and Tyler Smith actually going at 47. So I believe that means George Pickens is available. So at pick 48, the Chicago Bears select Kyler Gordon, cornerback out of Washington. Here we go again, PFF. we're adding a couple different people from the same position. Yet again, like what we were talking about with PFF, the PFF Mock Draft Simulator just doesn't do a great job at understanding you've got someone. But at the same time, too, Petrie can be shifted over to that safety. So we're going to be optimistic with this. Also, a little bit about Kyler Gordon. He's also very versatile. So he can play outside, he can play inside. So we have some very, very versatile chess pieces at this defensive backfield. And adding these two guys, I think actually really kind of solidifies your secondary for the future with Kyler Gordon and Jalen Petrie. Very different than what we're accustomed to seeing. And that's why we have the CPU pick for us, just to give us some different scenarios that we never really see. But like I said before, too, Kyler Gordon, 144 snaps in the slots and 527 at regular corner. So he does have that positional versatility. Why we see him kind of dropping. He's a freak athlete. And he's got great burst, but he needs to work on his eyes. He really needs to be able to diagnose what's happening in front of him. He's been able to get by with very good athleticism throughout his career at Washington. And the thing that gets me nervous is as a Washington corner, I get a little bit nervous because it seems like they're very, very well coached. Washington has had quietly kind of become DBU a little bit because of just the amount of people that they've been adding. So next, I went a little bit too far, but at pick 71, the Chicago Bears select Daniel Falele, the tackle out of Minnesota. We talked about this before. Very big size, right tackle, kind of a project player. I kind of iffy on it. I just would rather want to try and get a left tackle. I'm seeing other people that are available. Nicholas Petit Ferrer would kind of rather want him. I think he's more of a scheme fit. But yet again, we're using a simulator. We're having them auto pick That's the reason why. Cole Strange, even just as a pure guard, would be kind of nice to have it because he's very athletic. And or even like a Kirby. Actually, for this one, we wouldn't even want a safety because we already have too much. Or even a Calvin Austin. Calvin Austin, someone I didn't talk about in the wide receiver episode, but man, that guy is a gadget player, absolutely game wrecker. It would be amazing for the Bears to get him, but I didn't talk about him last one because I could only pick 5 people early on. So let's scroll all the way down to our next pick at pick 148. So at pick 148, the Chicago Bears select JT Woods, safety out of Baylor. So we're reuniting JT Woods with Jalen Petrie. And honestly, yet again, we're adding a little bit too much defensive backs, but still to kind of just flip it, JT Woods could at least has the potential to be a very good gunner. I believe he ran a 4.36 off the top of my head. He's 6'2, 195, and a very good cover guy. The only thing that gets me nervous about him as a potential gunner is this number right here, about an 18% missed tackle rate, which you don't want to see out of your safeties. Not a good tackler, but is somebody that was very good at that deep coverage, which is what we'll predominantly be using in our cover two shell for our cover two system. Cover two or cover three is what we're going to be predominantly using with a Matt Eberflus style defense. So JT Woods, very good athlete, good cover guy. So solid pick. It's just we already have a couple defensive backs already on this team, but I guess we're loading up. So let's move on to the next one at pick 150. The Chicago Bears select Justin Schaefer, the guard out of Georgia again. Already talked about him. Not a big fan. Feel like he's only a left guard. A lot of other people are saying that as well. Not the biggest fan. But I want to just call this guy out because he goes one pick afterwards. And this to me, I would love for the Bears to get up, dance around if they end up doing this. Haskell Garrett, the defensive interior out of Ohio State, not just because he's from Ohio State, but I talked about him when I went through every single Ohio State prospect. This guy is very, very talented with his hands and a very talented pass rusher that you can get in like the fifth or even really kind of more so in that fifth round. You got to pull the trigger. He could at least be somebody that can disrupt some passing downs, and could potentially develop into something more from a running perspective. But getting a pass rushing defensive interior player is already hard enough. So that's why I like the idea of him. But obviously, we went with Justin Schaefer. So we at least have a guard, we at least have a tackle. But as we continue to go down at pick 186, the Chicago Bears select Daniel Bellinger, the tight end out of San Diego State, a new guy that we have not seen yet in any of these mock drafts. So a little bit about Daniel Bellinger. He's a very good size at that tight end position, 6'5", 253, and a very good 40 time. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but a very good athlete at the tight end position. Very good straight line speed. He's an inline blocker, so kind of that Y position. Lines up right next to the tackle, and he's a willing blocker. With a lot of these guys, you just want to see them want to block somebody, and he is that type of a player. The only downside, right, while you see him kind of dropping or falling, is that he's not too quick. But at the same time, he's a tight end. Tight ends shouldn't be too quick, anyways. So to me, Daniel Bellinger, I think that he's a solid player, and also I love seeing a 0% drop rate from last year. He was only targeted 43 times, caught it 31 times. But I think I like the selection, adds a little bit of depth. The only thing that I kind of question now is we just signed O'Shaughnessy, my bad. Very, very difficult names that we have on this team now. But with O'Shaughnessy, it's how much depth do we really need at tight end? Because we have been adding some depth there. So maybe we don't actually need one, but I still like the potential that Bellinger at least brings. So that's it for our third mock draft. We have two more left. This one was Jalen Petrie, the cornerback slash safety. We're just going to say safety for this one, out of Baylor. Then we got Kyle. Then the we ended up selecting Kyler Gordon, cornerback out of Washington, which was a very interesting move from auto pick. So we think maybe he could be more interior, but we have some flexibility at cornerback position. Daniel Falele, the tackle out of Minnesota, really more of that right tackle than JT Woods, safety out of Baylor. So could be a good special teamer, could potentially battle for a position. Depends on where Petrie ends up going. Justin Schaefer, left guard out of Georgia. Not a huge fan. And Daniel Bellinger, the tight end out of San Diego, who could be a good depth piece and provide some good speed. Overall, I think this is okay. It's a very interesting draft because, yet again, Justin Fields is pissed. Justin Fields is looking at this going, you got me a tight end and that's it. so so PFF, you gotta shape up. You gotta get some wide receivers out here in some of these mock drafts, because clearly we need some wide receivers and none of them are being drafted by auto pick. So I would give this maybe like a C plus. I might be giving it a C plus because I just feel bad for some of these auto picks right now. Because yeah, like we have way too many cornerbacks. I think we fix the cornerback position by this draft that we just went through, but we have a lot more holes as we all know. So on to the fourth mock draft that we have generated. So for some of the new people, what we did is we were the Dolphins and we traded away all the draft picks and we then had it auto generate. So that's why we have to scroll through all these. But as we're going through, as we continue to scroll down, we are getting down to our pick number 39. We're seeing a couple quarterbacks go. We see Jahan Dotson go at pick 34. We have been seeing him fall a little bit more. We're seeing Raymond drop a little bit from these mock drafts as well. Kenyon Green going one pick before the Chicago Bears. That would have been very nice. But let's see, because I feel like we have some people that could be available to us. But let's see what the computers selected. With the 39th pick in the draft, the Chicago Bears select George Pickens, wide receiver out of Georgia. So I'm a Pickens fan, mainly because when you watch his tape, he looks like a first rounder. He's got very good ball skills. And he does the way that he moves, the way you can just tell, like he's a next level type of guy. But as you can see out here, he tore his ACL. And that's where a lot of people are kind of questioning, is he truly going to be great? He also had a very good year in 2019, but was never really able to kind of capitalize and show that on tape again. So a lot of people kind of question, this is he that round one wide receiver that we saw in 2019? Or has he been just, or is he not really that guy? He also was I think he missed a couple games for suspension. So there's some questions about character as well, but honestly, I like him because he's got a good blend of speed and size. 6'3", 195. You absolutely love to see it, and only 21 years old. So our first pick, George Pickens. Finally, PFF decided to draft a wide receiver. But we're still seeing kind of the same people that were in our range. We saw Travis Jones, Tyler Smith. Skye Moore actually dropped to pick 42, the wide receiver out of Western Michigan. We're seeing Christian Watkins and Jaquan Brisker dropping all the way to 47th to the Washington Commanders. So with pick 48, the Chicago Bears select Jalen Petrie, cornerback slash safety out of Baylor. I'm liking that. I'm like, we got a wide receiver. We have some help at that secondary, can play multiple positions. I like it. We already broke down Petrie. I've already expressed my love for him as a player today, so I won't have to do that necessarily too much for the second time around. But let's see what we can do. Let's see what we ended up doing, I guess, with pick 71. So with pick 71, the Chicago Bears select Abraham Lucas, the tackle out of Washington State. Okay, PFF, I'm liking this one a lot more. It just took 4 different attempts. So a little bit about Abraham Lucas, because we haven't been able to talk about him. We just talked a little bit about where he was going. He's 6'6", 315 pounds. He's a right tackle out of Washington State. Now, very good athleticism, very good feet, just incredible at mirroring people as well, can really kind of just track. Phenomenal pass blocker. And the reason why we know he's a phenomenal pass blocker is because that's all they do at Washington State. They only pass the football. If you don't believe me, out of 944 snaps back in 2019, he was passing, he was pass blocking for 786 snaps and only ran block for 158. Just absolutely insane. So that's the biggest question with him coming out is he a good run blocker? That's the biggest question. A lot of people say when you're in this scheme, you know that you're always going to be pass blocking. Some might say, well, then everyone's pinning their ears back, so you have to be really good. Others will say, well, then you just master this one piece and that's it. I really like Abraham Lucas from this in this range. Only thing I don't love is he's not a left tackle. I like the idea of having a left tackle, but still, you at least have someone that you feel could potentially go in and start for you at that right tackle spot. So I'm liking this. We got a wide receiver, got a slot corner slash safety, and we got a tackle. Let's hope that this keeps on going on, and let's move down to pick 148 to see who we got. So at pick 148, the Chicago Bears have selected Jalen Armour Davis again. Already expressed, not a huge fan, but he does have length. He did play for Alabama, so a very credited school. And so a lot of people, though, a lot of people around the community do like him, or it sounds like some people must know that some people in the NFL like him. So he's got the size, so he could be productive in our system. But we did talk a little bit more about him before. So we did get another cornerback, probably more on the outside. Might be the Kindle Vildor replacement because he's got more size. So probably seen more like a scheme fit for us. So at pick 150, though, we go with another cornerback, Caleb Evans. We already talked about this guy too. I like him a lot more. Very good size, very good length, very good speed, very good press. So overall, good. But let's kind of move over to pick 186. And now at 186, we are going to the Chicago Bears select Cordell Volson, the tackle out of North Dakota State. And this is a guy that I really like. He's very nasty at the point of attack, which is what we want out of our offensive linemen. And what I like about him too, as you can see, he's got flexibility at the right guard position. 127 snaps last year at right guard, 135 the year before. He even played a little bit of left tackle. So I like that because you could potentially shift him over to the right guard spot from North Dakota State. So he's got this nasty, but he was going against lesser competition. He looked decent in the Senior Bowl. I didn't love what I saw, but still has some potential for the Chicago Bears, especially late in the sixth. I really like this pick because it gives us somebody at the tackles or at kind of that guard spot. So I'm looking at this draft class that we had. So this fourth one, George Pickens, wide receiver out of Georgia, Jalen Petrie, cornerback slash safety out of Baylor, Abraham Lucas, tackle out of Washington State, Jalen Armour Davis, cornerback out of Alabama, Caleb Evans, cornerback out of Missouri, Cordell Volson, tackle slash guard out of North Dakota State. This is my favorite one that we've auto picked by far so far. I'm tempted to say it's a B plus just because I feel so optimistic about it. I don't love that we got two cornerbacks in the middle. But you got to go with it because we did an auto pick and we're noticing PFF loves to draft the same positions over and over again. So with this, I'm going to give it a B plus. I'm going to feel optimistic about it because I feel we got a wide receiver out of George Pickens. We got a very good player with Jalen Petrie. We have a person that can compete for a starting tackle job in Abraham Lucas, and Volson could potentially be a guard for us and lock that position down. So I like what that fourth one was. But now we're down to the final mock draft that we have. This is probably the longest episode I've done in quite some time. So thank you all for sticking around for this. Final mock draft generated by PFF. So what we got here, let's get into it. So let's scroll all the way down And let's see. So Traylon Burks dropping all the way to pick 33. That's interesting. Want him a little bit farther down to pick 39, I'd say perhaps. But Jaquan Brisker going at 35. Brisker's really been kind of going either early or mid, which is kind of where I think that he is going to end up falling. But also we're seeing Ritter, Pickett. So gotta love seeing those quarterbacks go high. But at pick 39, the Chicago Bears select wide receiver Jahan Dotson out of Penn State. I like this pick. I didn't talk about it on the wide receiver show like I mentioned before, but you're seeing this guy 5'11, predominantly lined up in the slot. I do like his size, especially for a slot type of receiver. Very good home run type of threat. So really, really like this. Great, really good hands. I think underrated hands overall. You see this 2.2% drop was really a dominant weapon for the Penn State Nittany Lions. And if you're able to get a talent like this with our first, second round pick, I really like that. I think that this is a good selection. And yet again, way to go, PFF. We're drafting a wide receiver. So since for about two of them, we didn't draft a single wide receiver because of auto pick. So let's keep going down. We're starting to see this similar guys that we've seen before. So we're seeing a Kenyon Green dropping. That would be incredible for the Bears. Kind of lock down that guard position. George Pickens has already gone. Travis Jones is pretty much always going in 39 to 48. I think in every single mock draft that we did. But let's keep on going. So at pick 48, the Chicago Bears select wide receiver Christian Watson. PFF, don't do this again. Don't be adding all the same people at the same position now. But Christian Watson, we talked about as a project. So he gets added from the auto pick selection. I'm going to try and put a positive spin on this, even though that it was a computer that made this selection. The reason why I think this is good is none of these guys are absolute slam dunks. So maybe Christian Watson can develop. Jahan Dotson can kind of be playing with it. I'm going to try and put a positive spin on this. Because if this does happen, I'll be very, very, very interested. We're probably going to get a lot of frustrated fans, but still, I think that it's at least an interesting scenario. So let's keep going down and let's see what ends up happening at pick 71. So we're getting down here. We're seeing some tackles, Falele, Salyer, Kennard, all going before the Chicago Bears pick. So at pick 71, the Chicago Bears select wide receiver Jalen Tolbert out of South Alabama. So it's official, guys. The PFF mock draft machine is officially broke. If the Bears select three wide receivers in their first three picks, I'm pretty sure the Bears fans are all going to be like, okay, we didn't need wide receivers that bad. Okay. We didn't really need it. It seemed like this three wide receivers in the first three picks for auto pick. That's just crazy. Like that's just absolutely insane. I think this feels like the fans that just only want wide receivers. And if they did a mock draft, they're like, I just picked three wide receivers in the first three picks, and that's what I did. So Jalen Tolbert, though, all jokes aside, a little bit about him. He's got good size, decent height. I know that he was listed at 6'4" for the South Alabama Jaguars, but he's a very good deep ball player. So for the Bears, he could give us a good deep ball, really good deep ball routes as overall, but also was just absolutely dominant for the South Alabama Jaguars, racking up 1,474 yards. Absolutely incredible. Very good player. So I like him more in this third round type of range, but I don't love him when you already have two wide receivers. So I can already tell you that that the fourth mock draft is probably going to be our favorite one so far. um, but really, with this fifth one, let's go all the way down to 148. And I swear to God, if it's another wide receiver, I will never use PFF's mock draft simulator again. But at pick 148, the Chicago Bears select Mario Goodrich, the cornerback out of Clemson. So way to go. The auto pick didn't select a fourth wide receiver. But in all seriousness, Mario Goodrich, I really do like him for the Chicago Bears. Talking about 6 feet tall. He's got decent length overall at that outside corner position. But what I also really, really like about him is that he's a good press zone player. Targeted 83 times and forced 18 incompletions. The only downside, a 1-year starter. That's why you're seeing him kind of drop. So I'm more than fine with the Bears taking a shot at him later on in the draft. So to me, good pick. I think that he's got some potential to be a kind of compete for that starting outside corner job, even though that we have Tavon Young. And I scrolled down, so people have already seen the next pick. So without further ado, the Chicago Bears select a Caleb Evans cornerback out of Missouri. And if we wanted a reason that why I think that the PFF Mock Draft Simulator is a little bit broke, this is a very similar type of player, a very good press guy with good length. That is on the outside. The only thing is he's played a lot more, like we've talked about. So two outside corners. And going all the way down to pick 186, last pick of all these mock drafts, Chicago Bears select John Ridgway, the defensive interior player out of Arkansas. Now, see, I like this pick. I've never talked about John Ridgway on this podcast. He's a good player. He's more of like a nose tackle. He's played predominantly for the Arkansas Razorbacks. So to me, he's really more of that run stuffer, zero tech, one tech on that defensive line. I really like him. I think that he's a solid player later on. Typically, I would rather want to try and go after a type of pass rusher on the interior, but still, he can kind of be kind of a Tonga player. Maybe be a backup to Tonga because right now Tonga is listed as a starter. Unless you want to say that Blackson is going to be the starter, it's really up for debate as of right now, depending on what true positions people will be playing. But Ridgway just has really good power, really good hands, and just incredible at shedding a lot of the centers. When he's one-on-one, very good moves. So to me, he could be a late round guy that somebody acquires that is just sticks around with a couple different rosters. So that about does it. So this last one, this was kind of just summed up this entire exercise. So Chicago Bears with the final mock draft, Jahan Dotson, wide receiver, Penn State, Christian Watson, wide receiver, North Dakota State, Jalen Tolbert, wide receiver, South Alabama, cornerback, Mario Goodrich at 148, cornerback, Caleb Evans, cornerback out of the cornerback out of Missouri. Then defensive interior, John Ridgway out of Arkansas was the final pick. So, what did we learn today? Honestly, I did not. I really am a fan of the Draft Network's mock draft machine, and when I look at this, I just think that because sometimes I see PFF mock drafts, and I'm like, that seems really way too good. And it was interesting to just see what do they actually select because when you go through it this way, it doesn't seem like there's as much rhyme or reason as the draft networks, where the draft network at least has kind of that program to say, I drafted a wide receiver, I'm not going to draft another one later on. Not saying you shouldn't do that, but if you were programming that, I would probably do that because then you get drafting 3 wide receivers in the first 3 picks, which is a little bit nuts, to be completely honest. But thanks so much. So you want to make sure to stay tuned next week. We have our final mock draft Monday. I have, I think, 6 or 7 different draft profiles that I'm pushing out. So I'm pushing out probably about an episode a day. You want to make sure to subscribe on Twitch, on YouTube, however you're looking at this right now. You want to follow. Also, download the podcast on Apple, Google Podcast, Spotify, all those different items. Download it down. But also next week for the mock draft Monday, I'm really excited about this. We're going to have 5 mock drafts again. Probably won't take as long, but we're going to be going through how do we fix what if we have different mentalities. So one of them will be fixing the defense. One of them will be fixing the O-line. One of them will be giving Justin Fields weapons. One is taking best player available. And last is trying to get Chris Olave no matter what. But thank you all so much for coming, and make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, and Unbearable Sports Podcast, we're out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bad chick.
Thank you for listening to this Belly Up Sports Podcast Network product. Some said we go belly up, so we made it our name, and we're still here.